Welcome to Lesson 1 of the 5th section of Hope. In the last section, you took a deeper dive into examining your emotional wounds, where they came from, and how they impacted you, using the biblical model of a tree. Now that you have been able to more fully explore your past and identify specific areas of wounds or trauma that you have experienced, in this section we will focus on clearing up any confusion related to your past that is essential to finding freedom from painful emotions. Identifying symptoms and recognizing emotional wounds and their causes are important steps in learning to release and resolve your pain, but they are not enough on their own. Before you can begin to put emotional pain to rest, you must also begin to understand and clarify areas of responsibility for the pain. Once again, truth is essential for your healing. Placing responsibility for hurt or choices where they don't belong will only keep you stuck. You must examine the rocks that remain in your soil and how they are affecting your roots, so that with God's help you can create better soil and not hold to false beliefs, ideas, or choices that keep you from growing and healing. This requires being clear on who is responsible for what and where to go from here. So let's begin this workshop again by looking at what the Bible has to say about how others can indeed wound us and how responsibility works from God's point of view. In Luke 17, 1-3, we read, Jesus said to his disciples, "Things that cause people to sin are bound to come, but woe to that person through whom they come. It would be better for him to be thrown into the sea with a millstone around his neck than for him to cause one of these little ones to stumble. So watch yourselves." In Luke 11:46, we also read, Jesus replied, "And you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with heavy burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them." Finally, in Ephesians 6:4, we also read, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." These scriptures clearly state that we can be caused to sin by others, loaded down with burdens from others, and that we cannot carry, and that we can be exasperated by those in authority, especially as children, when we don't have the ability or tools to know what it is happening. Although the Bible is also clear that we are responsible for our own sin, we should acknowledge this truth that we can be hurt, oppressed, and even caused to sin by others. And all of these things can impact our tree and the emotional roots that we discussed in the last workshop. So if this is the case, why is it so difficult for us to acknowledge this reality and sort through what is our responsibility and what is not in our process of healing and recovery? Why is it so hard to see and speak the truth about those who hurt us? A main reason we struggle to be honest about the past is because we have come to believe lies or half-truths that keep us stuck, and our enemy Satan, the father of lies, wants us to be misled and confused to keep us there. Here are some key areas where Christians often struggle in sorting out the truth. First, we often confuse ideas of honesty and honoring. For Christians, the idea of honoring one's parents and its connection to the Ten Commandments is important. Exodus 20:12 tells us to honor our father and mother, which, as the Apostle Paul reminds us in Ephesians 6:2-3, is the only command that comes with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Clearly then, honoring our parents is important to God and our well-being. But what does it exactly mean to honor? Although honoring certainly includes showing respect, gratitude, and deference, and even obedience to parents or authorities in appropriate ways, the word honor is the Hebrew word kabod, whose root literally means heavy or weighty. To honor someone is also an acknowledgement and understanding of the heavy and weighty influence they have in our lives. We can therefore be fully honest about the impact and weight of influence from our parents or other caregivers or authority figures, even when it was or is hurtful or negative. We don't have to lie or minimize the truth to honor them, but recognize the good and the bad and its importance in our lives and the weight that it brought. A second reason we often have difficulty facing the truth is that we often hold onto childish thinking. In 1 Corinthians 13:10, the Apostle Paul tells us that the goal for a Christian is to increasingly think like an adult and put childish ways behind us when he says, "When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me." When we are still being affected by hurts and pain of the past, it is as if our unhealed and unresolved emotions keep us stuck seeing things from the view of our wounded child. When we were children, we have what is known as magical thinking. The Encyclopedia Britannica describes it this way: magical thinking, the belief that one's ideas, thoughts, actions, words, or use of symbols can influence the course of events in the material world. Magical thinking presumes a causal link between one's inner personal experience and the external physical world. In other words, as children, we easily believe that we are the ones to cause events and are responsible for other people's behaviors and emotions, or have control over them somehow, and that if we can just work hard enough or become good enough, we can change things or make them work out differently. This kind of thinking can help us survive and give us a sense of control and even hope in the midst of trauma, and is natural for children. But because it is not based on the truth of the power or abilities we really have, it can later keep us stuck. A third reason we often have difficulty facing the truth about the past is because of our parents' or caregivers' authority when we were children, and our need to have faith in their goodness toward us. Because of this, we may have guilt and confused feelings about our past or what happened to us. Dr. Sandra Wilson describes our childhood logic like this: my parents or authority figures who hurt me are more knowledgeable, bigger, and stronger, so they must be right. Someone who loves me and cares about me can't really be bad or do bad things, so I must be the one who's wrong. If it's my fault or there's something wrong with me, I can control it and be safer and not have to face the overwhelming reality that people I love and need to take care of me hurt me. If I acknowledge that they hurt me, I might lose the relationship and be rejected, and that would be worse. When we continue in this way of thinking, we feel guilty or take responsibility for things that are not ours. We are not living in the truth and end up bearing sins and burdens that are not our own. We also continue to live in fear of rejection and in giving those who hurt us or others power over us, as these beliefs often leave us feeling one down in relationship to others and living life from a framework of taking responsibility for things that are not ours, while not taking enough responsibility for ways we can actually help ourselves. A fourth reason we often have difficulty facing the truth is that we often confuse love and loyalty. In unhealthy families and situations, love becomes a confusing idea, and there is often not much real love to go around. Real love is based on truth and righteousness like it is with God. And just like God's love that not only is patient and kind but rejoices in the truth, real love also pursues reconciled and real relationships, what is best for the other person, mutuality and personal maturity, and holiness for oneself and others. When we focus more on loyalty or a view of love that is more about pleasing others, or avoiding conflict or hurting someone, we are not participating with God in the process of redemption and the ministry of reconciliation that is grounded in truth. This is hard work, and it can seem especially unfair to be asked to love and take more risks with those who hurt us. But God calls us to love even our enemies for a reason. Real love speaks the truth in love and seeks what is truly best for others, which includes repentance from sin and reconciliation with God and others. We will explore these relationship issues more in an upcoming workshop. Sometimes we also stay focused more on loyalty because we are unaware that what happened to us was wrong or not normal. In essence, we are still caught believing and living out the rules of the relationships and communication styles set by our families or the person who hurt us, instead of healthier and more biblical, honest, and helpful rules and boundaries. Loyalty to dysfunctional family dynamics and relationship rules is not love. Finally, sometimes we live more by loyalty than biblical love because we don't remember well or don't understand the impact of what happened to us. In other words, we may not be consciously or purposely avoiding the truth, but honestly can't remember events or may have gaps in time in our memory. Extremely hurtful memories can actually be repressed, making it a problem to face truth we can't remember. Also, when living with a certain set of rules and expectations is all we know, we have nothing to compare it to and therefore continue to believe that it was fine or not that bad. So when we remember, we may tend to minimize the truth. We may even have been told to ignore the pain, buck up, or that what we saw or felt shouldn't matter. When such things are the case, we can't see clearly enough yet to love in more truthful ways, either ourselves or others. A fifth area of confusion when it comes to facing the truth about the past is when we are aware of our own sinful choices and struggles, and even those of others, and don't want to judge others. This half-truth is often rooted in our misunderstanding of the difference between judging and condemning. A favorite verse of many Christians who do not understand a more biblical understanding of love is Matthew 7:1 and 2, where Jesus says the following, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it will be measured back to you." However, the verse is often quoted out of context, as Jesus goes on to describe in the very next verse the context of how we should actually be judging. He says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." As you can see, Jesus is clearly still supporting the idea that it's okay to remove a speck from your brother's eye, but putting it in the right order of making sure you understand your own sins first. There are also other verses where the Bible is clear that we are to judge and use good judgment, such as the following. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 2 says, "Or do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more the things of this life?" Luke 7:43 also says, Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven," in his answer to a question and parable that Jesus explained. Jesus then says, "You have judged correctly." As we can see, the Bible is clearly not telling us not to make judgments, but to be humble, willing to examine ourselves first, and to not put ourselves in a position of condemning others or seeing ourselves as superior or better than others, while leaving final judgment to God. Similarly, we sometimes misunderstand what it means to rightly judge due to confusion we may have over ideas of acceptance, approval, and affirmation. When we mistakenly believe that we are not to judge anyone in any way, we can easily think that loving others means having to ignore, approve, or even affirm their wrong ideas or hurtful behavior so as not to offend them. Unfortunately, living in truth not only sets us free according to Jesus, but will also offend others at times. Our goal is not to avoid offending others, although we aren't usually looking to do it on purpose, but to accept others as they are while still being willing to speak the truth in love to them from a heart of servanthood so they too can find healing and freedom in Christ. Jesus also said that those who followed him would also be persecuted because others would not understand the truth. He says in Matthew 10 regarding himself and his message, "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." Here Jesus is not telling us to try and offend people, but simply stating the reality that when we seek to live in his truth, it will sometimes bring division, along with personal freedom, even division amongst those of our family, and those we may love most. Finally, in the famous love chapter of 1 Corinthians 13, as we have already pointed out, Paul also tells us that love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Truth and love are never separated in the Bible because they go together in the nature of God. We cannot really love God, ourselves, or others well while also supporting or living lies. We can only find freedom and peace as we accept ourselves and others while not approving of or affirming false ideas or behavior, especially those that bring us harm. Confusion regarding what it means to rightly judge, we also often misunderstand ownership and the idea of being responsible for and to. In their book Boundaries, Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend explain that we are responsible to others and for ourselves. Referencing Galatians 6:5, they remind us that each of us has a load of our own that we are called to carry. Using the illustration of a yard, they also describe how each one of us is responsible for what is in our yard, including things such as our feelings, attitudes, and behaviors that we must own and take responsibility for because they belong to us and are ours alone to handle. However, we are not responsible for what is in other people's yards. We can be responsible to others to help them with their burdens and needs, but the responsibility for their own loads is theirs. As we seek to clarify and speak the truth about what others are responsible for in regard to hurtful circumstances, behavior, or wounds in the past or present that they chose or caused, it does not and should not diminish what is ours to own and what we are responsible for, both then and now. It is vital that we keep these straight in order to heal our hurts and find emotional freedom, and also why it is so important to properly sort through the truth about the pain of the past. A sixth area of confusion impacting our understanding of truth that we need for our recovery is our tendency to gravitate toward unbalanced extremes in blaming ourselves or others in the process. As previously mentioned, sometimes blaming ourselves for experiences of victimization, especially in childhood, is easier because it gives us a sense of control so that we don't have to face the painful reality that someone who loves us could also wound us. That sense of rejection often feels worse than the wounds themselves. We loved, valued, or needed the ones who hurt us, and likely still want their love and approval if they are in our family. And we fear speaking the truth and facing the grief that this may never come to be in the way we long for. But really, we are blaming the victim and placing undue and unfair responsibility for things that were not under our direct control or in our yards to own, but never were. As adults, when we experience emotional wounds and victimization, we often recognize the choices we have also made or the role we may play or have played leading to our situation, which can make additional complications to our struggle. As adults, it is true and more likely that we have also sinned in the context of events along the way, and we are often aware that to some degree in life we have been both victims and victimizers of others, whether in great or small ways in the past. However, whether we do this as adults or children, this unbalanced thinking can lead us to overly blaming ourselves for the choices or behaviors of others, and we often need help sorting these things through in detail. It can also be true that we may struggle with the opposite extreme and focus too much on blaming others or the system or circumstances and lose the reality of the choices we have made and the part that we have played over time, even if only in response to the pain of our past. When we go to this extreme, we lose the reality of the influence and personal agency we still have to change and grow, and in trusting God's ability and sovereignty in being big enough to use all things for good. We minimize our own agency and abilities, which can leave us feeling more helpless and hopeless. Neither of these extremes is helpful, and the point of this lesson is to sort through the idea of finding what was truly someone else's responsibility and what might have been ours. Ultimately, as we have seen, healing requires picking up the specific pieces of our brokenness or examining specific areas of damage to our roots, and honestly and truthfully sorting out responsibilities, both past and present, in the proper way. With God's help, we do this to understand, heal, and forgive both others and ourselves, not to condemn or feed our pain or resentment. I hope this lesson has helped you to see more clearly what biblical responsibility looks like, and to consider how to sort out areas of confusion you may have had from the past that have been keeping you stuck emotionally. In the next lesson, we will continue to look at how not getting responsibility right can ruin your relationships and perpetuate destructive family dynamics, impacting you and your kids. See you in the next lesson.